meeting start.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. It is a city council work session for the city of Edina. Really great topic tonight, the 2024 small area plan work that's being done over at Lincoln and Londonderry. It is Tuesday, November 19, 2024, 5:30 p.m. We're in the community room at City Hall, and I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask Sharon Allison, our clerk, to call the roll for the council, and then we'll do introductions.
Councilmember Agnew. Here. Councilmember Jackson. Here. Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Councilmember Risser. Here. Mayor Hovland.
Here. No, let's go around the room. Lou, why don't you start out, and we'll go around the table and introduce yourself, please.
Lou Miranda, Vice Chair of the Planning Commission and Chair of the Lincoln Londonderry Commission.
Okay, thanks.
Ryan Day, Planning Commission, member of the work group.
Steve Brown, member of the work group.
Russ Rubin, member of the work group, ex-chair of the Arts and Culture Commission.
Nancy Spanos, member of the work group.
Julie Risser, council.
Carolyn Jackson, council.
Jim Hovland, council.
James Pierce, council.
Kit Agnew, council.
Ari Lenz, assistant city manager.
Zach Lockram, Men Collaborative, and we're the consultant on the Lincoln Londonderry plan.
Mary Weatherfeld, planning commission and member of work group.
Sharon Allison, city clerk.
Chris?
Chris Hocker, planning. Stephanie Hawkinson, planning.
Addison Lewis, community development coordinator.
Patel, finance director.
Zoe Johnson, city management fellow. Sandy Milner, men's collaborative.
Perry Vetter, Parks and Recreation Director. And if Russ gets to do it, I was liaison to the Arts and Culture.
And I'm Bill Newdorf, the Economic Development Manager. Chad Milner, City Engineer.
Billy?
Oh, Eileen McCauley, citizen.
All right, very good. So Lou, I'll turn it back over to you and let you introduce the topic and talk about the work that's being done.
Sure. So this is the Lincoln Londonderry Small Area Plan. So this is the newest plan that we have for the areas in the city that require a plan for future development. Zach has slides going through a lot of the history of what's going on here. So I just wanted to start by a quick recap of what happened last time. So we were here August 7th, and Zach had a presentation, and he had 6 minutes for that. And then after that, the mayor asked me for 30 seconds of comments, so that's probably why we want to start right away. So luckily, I think we have this entire project for ourselves today. So I'll let Zach describe where we are in the process, but I'd like to add something to think about during this presentation. So both the University of Minnesota Student Capstone Project, which was presented earlier this year, as well as their preliminarily approved areas of potential change by the Planning Commission, have said that a general upzoning of single-family home areas is not a good idea in the city of Edina. But that is wholly dependent on the city council allowing greater density in our existing commercial nodes in areas identified in both of those reports. So obviously Lincoln and Londonderry is one of those areas, and so it's important that what I've been pushing for in our meetings is making sure that we're following policies that the city council has adopted. So we have policies like equity plan and climate action plan. And so I've been pushing pretty hard to make sure that we're meeting all those goals. So the goal of this committee has been to listen to the neighbors, listen to residents, listen to business owners in the area, and apply that along with the knowledge of the 3 commissioners on the project who have knowledge of land use development in the city, and come up with a plan that will work for everybody. So that's basically where we are. So Zach, take it away.
Thank you, Lou. Before I even start, I want to say that one of the most important words that you will see on everything that we show today is draft. Where we are in the process right now, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is that we've done quite a good deal of work. We are, I think, very close to a set of strategies that make sense with the feedback that we've gotten from the public, with our working group, with the research that we've done, with our analysis of the market and the opportunities that come along with that. That said, I think there's still a lot of room for improvements, tweaks, new ideas to come in. We've actually asked our working group to be present as a part of this process today because we have a meeting on Thursday, and we are going to be taking what we hear from you as a council and really working on making what are hopefully some final decisions around what really moves towards being in a final draft that we then present back to the community at the beginning of December. So this is a very important meeting. This is really one of our key times that we get to really dig in with this material with you all. And so we're really excited to hear from you about the directions that we've taken. But as I've said, nothing that we are showing is immutable. We have opportunities to really think about how, as Lou has put it, we make sure that we are meeting all of the city's policies, that we are reflecting the community's desires, and that we have a plan that's actionable in the long term as well. So that's really our goal tonight. So just to remind you, we have gone through, we have essentially a three-phase process. The first phase, which began in May, was really about looking at existing conditions, asking the community what they love about the place, what they think could change, what new opportunities they see in the area. In July and September, we started to provide some new strategies that we thought would actually meet some of the types of recommendations that people wanted to see. Had some public engagement in order to really begin to vet some of that and get some additional feedback. And now we've really been working towards what does the actual action plan look like, providing the documentation. And then the hope is that we're moving towards adoption early in the new year. As a part of our community engagement, we've had 2 phases already. It's included 8 working group meetings. We've had 2 public houses at different components of at different phases of the project. Online engagement, any question that we were asking in person, we tried to make it also available online so that we could get feedback there. We've done pop-up meetings, so there were a few groups identified that we didn't feel really turned out to some of the first engagements, so we went to some additional locations where specifically families, shoppers in the area, and renters actually congregate in the area. And then through actually the work of the working group especially, these guys went out really door to door and helped us do a business and landowner survey. So we've talked to almost everybody. I think there's maybe a few folks that we didn't quite get, but a very, very strong response rate. Steve's smiling. There was a few we didn't get, but we got a lot of them. So we just want to give a couple of just quick feedback slides about some of the things that we heard from the public as we went out, some of the kind of visioning things. We heard across a lot of different types of activities that the natural setting, the trail, the creek were all really key assets for this area, something that people really, really liked. We, heard quite a bit as well about, and I think it's on my next slide, people really like the Londonderry shops. They hope for at least some additional restaurant and retail in some of this space, additional community spaces, potential for more housing also being in, kind of the high end of what we were hearing from folks that they were excited about trying to see. So after that first phase of engagement, and this is part that we'd shown to you already, but we took all of the responses that we heard in that first phase and really came up with these 6 priorities that we heard from the community they really wanted to have us focus on. So character of housing and development, economic development, local business, community and gathering spaces, green spaces, and environmental stewardship, getting around safely, and then community involvement and visionary planning. We also worked with the working group to establish a vision statement, and I'm just going to read the whole thing. In 2040, the Lincoln Londonderry area will be a welcoming gateway to Western Edina. There will be shops, restaurants, homes, and jobs, all in a natural setting along 9 Mile Creek. It will be thoughtfully and sustainably designed, blending eco-friendly amenities with natural beauty. The area will be easy to get to and to move around in, with bike lanes and trails, walking paths, bus stops, and carefully integrated parking. The Lincoln Londonderry area will be a great place to live, work, and gather, fostering community and encouraging people to use trails and gathering spaces. And beyond that, we also took each of those priorities and we created a statement for what we were trying to achieve with each one of them. So with regards to development and character, promoting a balanced approach to housing that respects community needs and preferences. With regards to the economic development and businesses, encourage a diverse array of local businesses that support the community's needs. With regard to gathering spaces, create vibrant spaces that encourage and foster community and inclusivity. With regard to the natural environment, preserve and enhance the natural environment, prioritizing sustainability and outdoor activities. Getting around safely, ensure safe, accessible, and efficient movement. And then finally, in the community engagement and visionary thinking, foster a forward-thinking approach to development that involves the community. So I take a moment to read those all out loud because when we're talking about the recommendations that I'm about to lay out before you, have these in your mind. These are the things that we're trying to meet and the things that we're trying to achieve. So ultimately, one of our tests is we have to go to the end of the process and what would this look like in 20 years? And is what we've recommended going to actually achieve that vision that has been put forward. As I said, we did do both online and in-person engagement. In the online engagement, we were actually able to ask people where they were coming from. So we had a little bit of a map. So just so, you know, I think this is probably reflective of the in-person engagement as well, though we didn't map it in exactly the same way. But you can see there's a strong concentration around Parkwood Knolls and Bresden Park being the closest two neighborhoods. But we have received feedback from really all around the city, and you know, I think the few folks that are probably that you see outside of the city, likely business owners or other things. We asked the specific question, where do you live? So we had some folks that were coming from outside there too. So in the second phase, we did want to kind of check in on just how people prioritized these community priorities, and we asked it both online and in person. We had to ask them slightly different. On the online, you could rank them 1 through 5. On the in-person, you were voting for the ones you liked the most. So it's hard to connect them because the question was asked slightly separately. However, you'll see that the green spaces and environmental stewardship was a consistent winner, and it was a consistent winner by quite a great deal in everything that we saw. The big difference is you see that economic development and business and the getting around safely flip-flopped quite a bit in the online versus the in-person. I know for a fact in the in-person we did have several business owners and landowners actually in the group as well, so that may be what is part of the reason that the economic development rose a little bit higher in that response. Now, we've already also mentioned to you the issue of the constraints in sewage capacity. This has been something that was a sort of pre-existing condition for this area and is in fact actually something that's much larger than this study area. It contains actually, close to a third of the city is actually within this same area that has some of these same constraints. So. What we know now in terms of the existing situation, capacity is nearly fully utilized, and even some of the uses that could be currently allowed by zoning could potentially be denied permits if they're taking on more capacity than some of the existing uses. So there's 3 ultimate, opportunities here or options in terms of how this might move forward. One is, shifting capacity on site. Something goes away and something else comes in its place, and it is a more or less even trade-off. There's this potential for connection into Minnetonka and then upgrading the full kind of area. And as we brought up in the previous time that we presented with you as well, there's nothing that we could propose within our small area that financially would create the trade-off to do the upgrades for this large area. It's a question that needs to be addressed at a larger scale, probably within the city's next comp plan cycle, to think about how that whole area moves forward. And so the strategy that we've taken is really trying to think about what recommendations can we do in advance of that, This is recommendations in terms of potentially some minor changes to land use, establishing policy and regulatory frameworks so that in the long term, we are seeing the type of redevelopment we want, should that be resolved in favor of actually allowing more capacity on site. Mobility improvements being a big one that we can obviously carry out today. And then some of the beautification and gathering space improvements. But in the longer term, for major changes in land use, for major redevelopment to happen on this site, it is likely that that is going to have to be resolved first. And then we also do, in our recommendations, talk about some potential changes to the circulation patterns within the area. But that would only really be able to be accomplished if we were to do some redevelopment in the area. So essentially, we've sort of created a plan that is a little bit split in two, that focuses on both the short term, what can we be doing over the next 5 or 10 years, as well as if when this gets resolved, what would the capacity in the area be? What would be some solutions that fit well within that area? So I think I'm transitioning here to talk a little bit more about some of the plans and recommendations, but I want to open it up to the working group and just make sure I didn't miss anything or anything that you guys want to mention as well. Okay, and any questions from you all so far?
One of the things that, as I was going through this, is, and you talked in your opening a little bit about analysis of the market. So I don't see in the value statement how things are going to be paid for. And that's, I think, needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can take a note on. I think, you know,
whether it's going to be city financed
Yeah.
or privately financed.
Yeah, so most redevelopment, it is a little hard to predict where the market's going to be by the time that this is going to be resolved. But I think that what we have tried to do is create redevelopment scenarios that would be able to be accomplished within generally market conditions. So from the perspective of that redevelopment idea, mostly seeing that. However, of course, there are always questions that come up in that, you know, is affordability something the city wants to bring in some additional funding to see X, Y, or Z outcome, or some of those sorts of things. So there would be opportunities within that. We will work some, so for some of the more public realm improvements and some of those, we've had some discussions with folks like, I'll just jump ahead to a recommendation. You know, there's this idea of how do we create a better connection directly from the existing trail to the new Opus train station. So we've had a discussion with the city of Minnetonka. They're like, oh, that sounds like something that we could be interested in as well. That might be an opportunity for some sort of joint grant application or something like that moving forward. Similarly, we've talked with Three Rivers Park District about what types of funding there might be. So we will work to try and identify some of those kind of key opportunities. I would say in general, the road reconstruction and intersection improvement type stuff would probably be more likely general funds, unless there is, you know, there is sometimes pedestrian improvement fundings or other things like that come through Met Council. Our entire federal DOT is also going to be changing in the next couple months, so that even is hard for us to identify for sure what the grant opportunities are going to be, but we'll do our best to try and lay out some of what those options might be for some of those improvements.
And I would take it up a higher level and just have the values that the group, reflect the values of the group. And it may be, you know, seek grant opportunities as the number one financing value. But I would like to have just sort of a feedback of people who've been deep into this, how they envision it actually happening, whether it's public-private partnerships or grants, but just a statement somewhere in the thing about money.
I would say, and yeah, Mary, please jump in.
And there was a lot of talk about the community engagement space. You know, that kids hang out on the grass in the corner. You know, that there's not, and I don't think anybody thinks about anything large, but I think that piece of it was really of interest to the neighborhood and figuring out a way to kind of.
And I was gonna say too, I think like the most direct feedback that I can think of that we got from community engagement, and again, I'm interested if you all remember anything else. There was a pretty significant group that wanted to make sure that we were thinking about uses that maximize tax revenue. That was, I think, the most consistent thing that we heard, specifically talking about any kind of revenue or funding direction. Again, making sure that we're not creating additional tax burden on the neighborhoods around it with ideas and things. So that was, but we never asked a very specific question of, you know, like, do you want us to spend the city money or do you want us to go after grants? My typical, I mean, and this is my consultant opinion, is like, we should leverage the city money towards bringing in as much outside funding as you can, always, for this type of work.
So just, you know, even if it's just an appendix, just any kind of discussion that you had, I think that would be, in the future, helpful for us.
Absolutely, yeah, there will be, within like the full report, there will be an implementation chapter as well that will dive into some of that in terms of what is a capital project, what is a policy, what, you know, what types of funding might there need to be.
I just want to acknowledge, I like that point. I know there's a balance between when you're doing this work, you don't want to be too constrained with what's in front of us today, because then it might limit how creative you are in using the space. So I get that, but I do think it's wise to list that someplace so that people know that we are looking through that lens, just as you highlight the fact that we have a sewer capacity issue that has to be addressed. So just kind of in those terms, I just think it's wise that we acknowledge that in some way, but we don't want it to limit the creativity from the team.
That makes total sense.
My question is about goals set by Met Council, and I know we as a city have already surpassed the amount of luxury and market rate housing that we're supposed to produce by 2030. And I think I asked about it about a year ago, and I can't remember I thought a staff person said the idea is we'll draw people from outside of Edina, but it kind of seems as if there's no real limit on market rate and luxury. And I'm wondering, you know, where do the goals established by the Met Council fit in with your analysis, or are they part of it at all?
It's frankly not something that we've spent a lot of time on. Our analysis has been, and again, this is all with the caveat that any resolution on any of the sewage that would allow larger scale development to happen here is probably at least 10 years out, and markets change and so on. But the perspective has been more from a perspective of what is a developer likely to do within these spaces in terms of being able to do something that is financially feasible for them, that there's a market for. So you'll note, for example, in our long term, while we don't completely close off the idea that there could be significant office presence here, that is not something that is currently being built significantly.
Right. And I think I'm thinking of, you know, the changing it so the goal is office residential, or that's the guiding vision, oftentimes results in just purely residential.
Sure.
And then, and it just seems like we are losing so much diversity in terms of our land use. It'd be so fascinating to have a map of what it was 20 years ago versus what it is today.
Sure.
But, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So if I may.
Yeah.
So the student capstone project talked about how the city of Edina has to address both density of housing as well as commercial districts so that people can live, work, and play without having to drive everywhere. So that is one thing that drives the desire for more density within the city. It has nothing to do with the Met Council. It's our own city policies. And then to Councilmember Jackson's comment, I was on the 44th and France Small Area Plan, and I don't remember us ever talking about how we're going to finance anything. I mean, the residents are residents. They're not planners. They're not. We're looking for advice on, what are our goals, not like how we're going to finance it. That's a city council problem. it's not really a planning problem.
Well, there's a lot of public realm in here, and it just, we're having that conversation tonight, actually, about how we finance the Southdale plan. Okay, so it's top of mind. It was talked about in the Southdale small area plan. In the 44th and France, it's quite a bit different from this space. And what you've got here, I see a lot of new interior streets and spaces, things on the, putting the public space in the corner of the children's lot. I don't know who owns that. So would we buy the land from Children's and put that there? To me, that really matters, because I don't want to put something out in the public that is wonderful and beautiful and can't be financed. And we've come across that in the Grandview plan. People want a big public building and the public works site, and we can't afford that. So I don't want dreams to be set up so high that when implementation comes, we have this huge crash of expectations. So I want to have you think about how would this be financed, even on just a very cursory level, because if we set our dreams too high, then we have huge community blowback when we can't afford it. But this is so beautiful. Why can't we do this? Well, because it's more expensive than we can pay for.
Well, if you look at the, if you look at the Southdale district and the development we've had in that area, we have private streets that are not turned over to the city. And it would cost nothing to turn them over to the city. So again, it's not an issue that the Planning Commission is to deal with. It's something that the City Council needs to deal with.
Well, you're getting City Council feedback. We have to pay for this, and so I would like your opinion, even if that's what you write, that we don't have the capacity to answer that. I would like to hear your opinions on
I
that.
think we can find a happy medium in that. I mean, and some of the long-term improvements you're talking about, like new road network stuff, almost certainly that is in the long term would need to pursue some sort of TIF strategy or something like that. But it is so long-term that it was hard for us to define that right now. What we, with relationship to that are talking about is, well, what do we need to put in a plan and or in some regulation in order to say, we want those roads in the future, and this is something that we should examine and pursue when those projects come forward. But the smaller scale, like the, streetscape improvements and some of the trail improvements, those are things that I think it makes sense, not for us to fully price out. That's not something I think it's not at a level of detail for that, but to be able to point to, the watershed district has this grant, and this grant, and the, X, Y, and Z, be able to give a little bit of direction and guidance on some of the opportunities there is something I think that we can do.
Not to belabor the point, but I again like this comment that Member Jackson made. You don't have to exhaust all costs. We're not saying you need to figure out how to finance something. It's as simple as, if there's an idea, you can just quantify what you think the relative, right, by a bunch of dollar signs, or $2 signs versus $4, just to give the order of magnitude. And so it shouldn't take a lot of effort to do that. And I think it's wise, partially because of the point you made, Lou, earlier. We didn't do that in some other cases, right? It's just wise for us to, I think, to do that. And it's just feedback. Everybody?
I agree with you. You're just talking generically about what kind of pies it could come from. And we have had some conversations about, generic conversations about how to, what taxes come in from different kinds of development. So there is some awareness of that within the working group and the community.
And I would say that also, as we've been exploring this phase of the project, we have also been getting feedback from various partners around specific costs that have shifted some of our thinking in how we think about long and short-term improvements. For example, we had a conversation with city engineer about MnDOT, the sound walls, and basically came to a decision that In the short term, when we're not seeing a lot of redevelopment, that's probably not going to be a cost that is going to be worthwhile for the parcels that are there. But we still want to acknowledge it in the long-term part of the plan so that if redevelopment were to happen, that conversation would re-engage and that could become a part of the discussion. And similar discussions about, what types of improvements we might want to make on the bridge itself if we do want to pursue this trail direction into Minnetonka, and what improvements have already been made there and how we work within the investment that's already been spent. So we are trying to be thoughtful about those sorts of items.
And not to, go against anything that somebody has said, but we could actually, as city council, and also, the planning commission deals with land use, and, you look at Children's, you see all that green space. I mean, just thinking about how do we protect that, it doesn't necessarily have to be city expense and turning it into a park. It can be actually doing a PUD where you actually increase the amount of green space instead of granted massive setback variances and diminished it.
Yep.
So that could be part of the conversation as well.
Let me start to jump in a little bit to talk a little bit more about some of the actual recommendations. And we have this map on the table. Hopefully you can all see it okay. I'll be kind of pointing out some things there in relationship to some of the things that we talk about as well.
On our computers too.
Oh, perfect. That's great. You can zoom in and zoom around a little bit. So the first kind of set of recommendations that we talk about are really character of housing and development. And these are really policy directions. These are thinking in the long term about how we want to see development happen within this area, what types of standards do we want to put to it, and similar to what you guys have done with your design standards for Southdale. The overwhelming kind of response that we've heard from the community is the idea of this as a kind of eco district, and really trying to think about the way that the wetlands, the creek, planting, the tree canopy, all of it starts to really connect. And we even in some of our engagement asked about, we showed pictures of different types of development, and we even heard in terms of development, people really want to see a lot of use of natural materials. They want stone and wood. They want to see, buildings kind of fitting within that as well. So when we talk about establishing design standards, what we've done is we go to your existing regulations, look at all of the different things that you're regulating, and try and make some decisions about, okay, well, if we were going to kind of super hone in on that eco district idea, what were some of the things that we would change? So the example that you'll see in the long term, what we've done is we've created kind of a sample set of design guidelines, and we have actually applied that to different parcels. So some of the things that we looked at were increasing the required, or am I gonna say this wrong? Decreasing the amount of permeable surface that is allowed, so increasing the amount of green area that has to be within any lot, increasing requirements around some of the tree canopy, rules around how parking lots are laid out, thinking about the ways that we can create shadier walkways within the parking lots, looking at some things, and again, these are just things that we got some feedback on. Some concern about the bulkiness of some of the buildings, so not necessarily even that they're dense, but just that they are very long and very large. And so we looked at some examples from, like St. Louis Park has created within their regulations, just things you can't have a wall that is longer than 130 feet. So what does that start to look like when we start to apply that in different areas? And then also looking at what are some of the additional stormwater things that we can add in terms of additional requirements. One of the things that we could even think about within this, there is a system called Sustainable Sites that is essentially, it's like LEED is for buildings, but it's for landscapes. So actually thinking about whether or not there's some of these requirements that we want to put on new development to meet some of those types of goals, and moving things forward. So all the things that you guys have quite a few years to actually get established and into the code before large-scale redevelopment starts happening in advance of those areas.
So just to technically, Zach,
Yeah.
These recommendations, is that, you said you had some sample guidelines that you're sort of.
That's right.
Where will we?
That will all live in the report, in the final report, but the long-term recommendations, which we will jump to in a minute, what we've tried to do is actually, use our guidelines in laying out how would this look if redevelopment happened using these guidelines. So, just as a quick example, you can really see on the children's campus, which is already zoned mixed use, so they already are entitled to that scale. We've looked at how do you arrange buildings so that you don't have, you can see that those buildings are, it's as many units as you have in the Loden, but they're a little bit smaller buildings, they're a little less bulky. They're arranged in a way that there's more open and green space around it. And then one of the things that we actually thought was really important in that specific case was there's an existing parking garage that's already been built. One of the least sustainable things you can do is knock down a parking garage. So we just wrapped new residential around that parking garage and let that serve as parking for the whole area.
So the vision for Children's is for it to go purely residential?
The way that we've drawn it, it would probably be mixed residential, again, assuming that there is an office or retail market that makes sense at the time that would get rebuilt. But given their existing zoning and the kind of general market conditions, we think that that's probably the most likely way that they would choose to redevelop.
I wondered what that building was, so that's residential wrapped around.
Wrapped around the existing parking garage, yeah.
That's very clever.
Yeah. In our research and talking to business owners, I think we were hearing that the Children's is right now, what percent utilized? Do you remember off the top of your head?
What percent utilized?
Like how many people are actually in the Children's building?
10%.
Like 10 to 15%, yeah.
Plus, it's not owned by Children's.
It's not, it's owned by Opus Corporation.
Oh, interesting.
That piece of land. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about some of those design guidelines. It's how do you start to set up the rules to get outcomes that are really appealing to the types of redevelopment that we're hoping to see. Keeping going on some of the short-term recommendations, the two parcels that are north of Lincoln Drive, or I'm sorry, north of Londonderry, apologies. They've sort of been identified as the two, one that is actively being marketed and one that also there's some potential for some redevelopment or sale at some point in the future. There's a desire to do that sooner rather than later on the part of the property owner. So what we've tried to do is kind of look at what fits within the community's desires that could also fit within the existing sewage capacity. The answer that has come forward kind of the strongest within that would be something akin to the Londonderry shops on the other side of the street. So small, kind of neighborhood serving retail being kind of a key opportunity. I think if it were possible, and again, this is, kind of what the market is out there for, small grocery is also, I think, something that's been highly desirable by the community, but finding the right type of thing there. One thing that we have talked about, I guess there has been at least some interest in potentially doing a gas station there. We think from the perspective of the working group that that's probably not quite the best use of that particular site. So would rather move towards something that is a little more kind of retail oriented for that type of redevelopment. And we think, the devil's in the details in terms of whether that could fit in the sewage capacity or not, but it is a use that is likely to. So the proposal there would be to take those two parcels and go ahead and work to rezone them to something that kind of fits within that long-term vision, as well as would allow some of those owners to be able to kind of move on from those properties in the shorter term as well.
So,
go ahead.
So for that site, is there capacity from a sewer perspective if it were relatively this scale, or the same scale as down here?
We think so, yeah.
To also have something like 1 layer or 2 layers of housing above it?
Probably not. They have, well, and again, this is, the devil's in the details. They have 8 toilets. in there. So that's kind of what we're trying to, you know, like, what does that look like?
So like if a brewery or something wanted to come in, it wouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, something with a lot of water use.
So it would really have to be dependent on what the proposed use was.
Yeah.
Even if it fit within that zoning.
Now, in the long term, is there potential to add housing above or other things, you know, when that gets resolved, redevelop again in another 15 or 20 years? I think like the average age of a building is something like 17 years in general, so it's not out of the question that you could see another round of redevelopment at some point in the future there as well. But in the short term, it's gonna have to be something that's relatively low intensity, on a site like that, from what we understand.
In some of the final documentation, like, I like the exchange you just had, because we oftentimes will talk in terms of it has to be light, or we can't do anything major, but to just say, there's 8 toilets there now, so if whatever we put there has to be able to be serviced by 8 to 10 toilets, or something like that, just helps, I think, ground people in the reality of the issue.
Well, and even the reality is something that used a lot of servers and needed a lot of cooling capacity, that might not work. You know, like, so there's a variety of elements that get, you know, pretty sticky depending on the specific needs. But I think that's a kind of a pretty straightforward way to put it.
But you're saying just provide that context.
Yeah.
Provide some examples, like, I like the brewery one as well. Yeah.
So in here, you've got these 2 intersections marked for change. I know when we looked at the apartments there was a lot of concern about that being a quasi-blind driveway in and out of there. Yeah. How much did the working group talk about that? Because if that's a retail area, which I strongly agree with that, but you're gonna have a lot of cars coming and going. How did you square that circle?
It's probably going to have to maintain the driveway where it currently is, rather than trying to shift to somewhere else on the site. The grades are pretty bad, and then we're also introducing a new trail connection, so we don't want a lot of driveways and curb cuts crossing a trail connection, so most likely it's people having to kind of turn in and then turn in. If we are drawing it within the established design guidelines too, I think the goal would be to have at least some, a little better relationship to the street in terms of people being able to walk up or get to some of those spaces from the trail, and improving some of that as well. But, in general, what we've tried to set up is keeping parking back towards the highway, further away from the neighborhood as well. So probably you're maintaining that same existing driveway location. And that's actually a shared driveway between the 2 parcels. And I move to.
Regardless, I was thinking about Lou's comment about working on 44th and France small area plan. And having observed a few of those sessions, and Mary Mother, you may have been involved in that too.
Just as a resident. Yeah.
But it was a combination of, as you met in the church basement, you were working together, neighbors and planning commissioners, to come up with a plan. And I'm just wondering, on the short-term recommendations and the long-term recommendations, are they kind of a true reflection of that collaborative sort of work, or does this reflect more of some of the pressures or sensitivities you might have felt from the broader neighborhood, as opposed to what you might have thought of yourself as a working group?
We have one more public workshop coming up. And I've thought along those same lines. I really enjoyed it when we've had one where we had about half an hour to kind of talk about pieces in there. But I think it's a great way to get buy-in from the neighborhood. So it'd be great if, presenting some of this stuff and getting some more detailed feedback from the neighborhood about what they want to see.
Yeah, so, this draft was just created, so the full committee has not met to discuss it yet, so.
Okay. Do you mind speaking specifically to the question about trying to balance what we're hearing from the community and, all of the policy, because I know this has been a concern of yours as well, is just how do we how do we find the right balance between some of the layers of community feedback we hear, as well as
Well, one thing
the city policies and so on?
Sure, I'll remind you that and maybe the council, I don't know if the council knew this or not, but on our first or second, actually our first two meetings, we had two people from the city, MJ and, sorry, I can't remember her name, who's in charge of sustainability. Mercer, yeah, thank you. Came and gave us one time a half-hour presentation and then a 1-hour presentation about sustainability and equity and how we should be dealing with that with the city, right? You guys remember those two episodes? So we've had, the committee as a whole has had training from the city on what those issues are. So we've discussed that, that was the very beginning. So, but again, we just got this plan, so I'm expecting on Thursday is when we're really gonna have that conversation about what those balances are and how do we balance that, because, no one's gonna be happy with everything, right? So, and that's what these committees are all about.
Yeah. Thank you.
But I think if we have a draft and we've got some idea, if we can kind of give that, not just to the working group, but the broader community, because December 2nd is our next public, right? Because when they see something, they react to it. So let's put it out there so they can come and talk to us about it, because I think we'd get a lot of interaction.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like there's some elements of this that are really grounded in that concept, Winter, you were talking about from the workshop, green spaces and environmental stewardship as sort of the linchpin of doing everything over there. And when you're over there and you're walking around, you can see the nature, but it isn't integrated with anything.
Yep.
It feels like there's a disconnect there, but that it could be, and everybody's recognizing that, it seems to me.
Yep.
That there's a natural world here that we're not even close to taking advantage of.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
In terms of integrating that into whatever's there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it really reflects, this was mostly built in the 60s and 70s. I think at that time, the creek was maybe thought of a little as a drainage ditch. You kind of had to hide a little bit, it was something that we were trying to figure out how to develop around rather than something that we were seeing as a key asset. And the investment that's already been made in the trails and things there have really started to bring that forward, as well as the value that it provides to the residents right around there, so.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point, because before the 9 Mile Creek Trail was put in, I mean, Mayor Hovland, I know you were around for this, there was a lot of resistance from residents, especially those who lived along it, that this trail was gonna go through their backyard, right? So it seemed like, infrastructure was being imposed on people, that it was gonna make this very natural area artificial and dense and everything. And it didn't, it did the exact opposite. I mean, it's the jewel of the neighborhood now, right? So and that's part of our job, is to help explain to residents and to each other that, sometimes you have to build a little infrastructure to make it better for everybody, and makes it better for the community.
Yeah. Okay.
And Zach is about to get into this, but some of the ideas we brought up between the natural stuff and the area are kind of, I don't want to say small, they're like 3 scales of ideas, like easy to implement ideas, medium ideas, and then bigger ideas. And so there's some that are very accessible,
yeah,
and I think easy to do, because it is such a personal space, or kind of neighborhood space.
Yeah. So I'll keep moving a little bit here. This next recommendation, and this is again just in the short term, recognizing the types of development that are there, looking at ways to improve some of the outdoor spaces and look of some of the industrial spaces in the short term. This could be stuff like we have some big walls facing the street. Maybe they're an opportunity for some artwork or something like that. Every single one of these buildings has old picnic tables pulled up into the medians underneath trees where people go out to smoke or eat lunch. And in the long term, we can actually put in the design guidelines, if you're going to build an office building, you need to have this much outdoor seating space, that you have space for that. In the short term, this would have to be something that would likely have to be incentivized with the local business owners, but seeing if there's some opportunities to just low investment, make some of those spaces a little bit nicer for the people that are using them currently type of improvements. This probably gets, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Real briefly, we have a tree ordinance, and when somebody cuts down a tree, they have to replant. It would be nice to make this an opportunity of a place where people could plant.
Oh, interesting.
trees under that, so
Yeah.
just to throw that idea.
Yeah,
out
we
there.
do have something talking about tree canopy, but that's an interesting opportunity. And we do, again, within those guidelines that we would be proposing, we would be requiring a more significant investment in trees with new redevelopment within the area as well. Establishing smaller rest stops or gathering spaces is something that came up, just really amenitizing the trail that people like. This is something we've talked to the Three Rivers Park District about, you know, these types of small investments in benches or other things like that. Again, not super expensive, but just making the spaces a little bit nicer. So we identify a couple of locations that we feel are good locations for those. I don't know if you remember from our original research, we actually took all the Strava data and we had these cow paths, you know, the places people are already crossing and sitting and those sorts of things. So identifying a couple of those spaces that people already like, that might be opportunities.
And I will add to that, meeting with Three Rivers, they were really open to, you know, allowing for that, and they were very clear about sort of the design standards that they have, and, you know, instead of calling it a trailhead, calling it a rest stop and that kind of stuff. So it was really helpful meeting with them to get sort of guidance there.
And this, I mean, this was feedback from the working group as well. Originally, we did talk about, you know, maybe a larger type of trailhead type thing with some parking, but the feedback was that, you know, this is better to be kept a little more local in its scale as well. So also looking again at just some smaller spaces, maybe just a bench or a wastebasket, those sorts of things. And the Park District does have standards for this sort of thing. So this is actually something where costing is actually pretty easy. I was actually wondering with regards to this one, if this could be something where you might even be able to do like adopt a bench type stuff or things like that and actually get community to invest in them as well. We talk about establishing one slightly larger community space, but still, you know, at a scale that, you know, it's probably a couple of picnic tables, some signage with maps, those sorts of things. The location that we identified here at the corner, this is on the property of Children, so it's Opus actually owns it. It would require acquiring some land or an easement from them in order to do something like this. The reasoning behind this particular location, it is kind of the intersection of where the trail turns, so there's a lot of folks congregating there, there's existing signage there. And then just observationally, we've also seen a lot of people at the other side going up, getting their coffee, and then just coming down and sitting in the grass space there and having conversations as well. So because of the grade changes, having it on the other side of the street was a little more difficult, but we thought if it's still kind of right here, it still potentially kind of draws to folks that are using the space in some of that way as well. So this is the one item that probably it's a little bit bigger investment in terms of the parks and open space component. And then we talk about public art as well, and you know, came up a few times. This is the gateway into Edina. This is you're coming in for the first time, so thinking about what could be done in what sort of spaces around public art as well. We talk about, and again, this is one it's sort of split into both the long term and the short term. In the long term, we want to make sure that we've got, you know, top of the line environmental stewardship, low impact development, and stormwater management required of new development that's happening in here. In the shorter term, we also have a number of spaces where the existing parking lots that are probably 30 to 40 years old are tilted to drain down into these wetlands. So looking at finding some funding to do some smaller scale improvements, working with those property owners to improve the stormwater connections along the sides of the parking lots in the specifically the areas that are really the most sensitive around those wetlands. We did some kind of polling of the community around what types of treatments they wanted to see, and one of the things that people said is they really wanted to see a little more naturalized spaces and a little less mowing. So there are a few areas in here, again, private property, though, where there's a lot of just mowing turf going on. This would probably be something, again, we'd have to work with the landowner, we'd probably have to incentivize to be able to do this, but asking people to move towards kind of more natural land management, you know, tying in the spaces around some of these buildings more with the natural environment that's around it, as well. This is kind of one of the, you know, pie in the sky thing, but as we mentioned, Children's is not using their parking at all for the amount of people they have. So you can actually see on the short term, we've actually like removed one of their large parking lots right next to the wetland there. Removing a parking lot is not a cheap thing. It's not something they're gonna do voluntarily, but that's a really big possible example of, we're not using this, it's right next to the wetland. Maybe there's something better that we could do or establish within some of that space, even in the short term.
To reiterate, it's Opus that owns it.
It's Opus that owns it, yeah. But it's the Children's is the lessee.
I was just gonna add, the Minnesota Realtors Association does have a green.
Yes. They have a beautiful, natural landscape that they've put in, and they have a lot of educational signage around it as well. So that's a really good example of what we could see more of that type of recommendation.
They got a grant to do that work, so.
Yep. And that is a good point. Again, there are environmental grants that can do, you know, so there are opportunities for some of those sorts of things. And then we also talk about increasing the tree canopy, you know, along Lincoln Drive, at the back of the properties closest to the highway, there's a lot of opportunities there. And there's quite a few other opportunities where there might be some spaces where, again, historically, some of this was wetland, so the trees aren't kind of the natural thing that wants to be there. Other areas were a little more upland and are places where we might be able to make some investment in just additional tree planting. And again, working towards that long-term goal of how the eco-district kind of feels in that area.
Just thought of something I wanted to ask Lou again. Lou, can you remember when 44th in France, that small area plan study work was done, and Meriwether may remember this too, was, we had the old dry cleaner to work around, and then did we finish that plan before the Lorient was, Ted Carlson bought that property and built the Lorient?
Yeah.
Was that something that was ongoing at the same time? I can't remember.
He was gonna be on the working group before
He
we
was
realized.
kicked off the working group.
When we realized there was a conflict, he.
Right,
yes.
and so, I was one of, I don't know how many people who recommended that the city council actually put a moratorium on development until the plan was finished, and the city did that. And so he didn't start building until we finished having the discussion.
Okay, I only asked that question because I think about it in the context of that piece of property that was proposed for redevelopment by Solheim that has limited sewer capacity. It took care of that issue around the conversation around potentially 80 units of affordable housing, but those people that own it, is that where the gas station idea has surfaced? Is that?
They've had multiple suitors on that site for potential purchase. They are hoping to retire and sell off that parcel as soon as they can. And I know they are watching this process very closely, and I think having some discussions with economic development and other folks around some of that as well.
And in terms of halting development, we didn't have a fully funded multi-unit affordable housing project at 44th in France. So it was a different, it was a
different situation. Yeah, I remember that now. I'm just wondering about those commercial interests that those people have that want to retire. They think about a gas station. I'm assuming it would have no car wash to be able to.
It would not have a car. It wouldn't be able to if they did. They did say, you know, it's the vendor that is interested was one of those ones that has a little bit larger convenience store kind of with it, so there's potential for some food or other options as well. But you know, the thing with a gas station is once you have a gas station, it's the land is kind of contaminated, you know, it's just, I think it seems like there are other suitors that hopefully we can encourage them to move towards, and in thinking about what types of zoning categories or land use we'd want to steer towards.
I'm sure they have interest too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Strong economic interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The point I was getting to was, I suppose if push came to shove, you could figure out a way to make a gas station.
Well,
You know,
and I think if
build
push came
it
to
in
shove.
a way where there were green space and environmental stewardship issues that were attached to
You
it.
certainly could, and, you know, nothing is stopping them from applying for a variance or a rezoning to be able to do that as well, and then that would have to be something that you would all have to consider with regards to everything that you know, right? So just like any other property, would as well, so, yeah. I already talked a little bit about, you know, the ecological standards. We heard quite a bit about a continued desire to ensure that we are not, to the extent possible, generating a ton of extra traffic, but even within that, that we're really working to improve the intersection safety and really ensure that we're trying to kind of keep major traffic from moving into the neighborhood. So we have a few different intersection improvement opportunities. One of them being at the Londonderry shops and just trying to think about how we kind of slow down and clarify folks that are coming around that curve right where there's pedestrians crossing. At the Lincoln Drive and Londonderry intersection, we would suggest either doing raised crosswalks or a full table. So this is, you know, the situation where essentially it's a crosswalk size speed bump, so cars really have to slow down to kind of move into those spaces. And then similarly over at Dover Drive, doing a raised crosswalk there would essentially be creating a big speed bump before you go into the neighborhood. And so those are all improvements that, and to your earlier question, these are probably more general fund type of improvements. I mentioned that one of the things that had come up was trying to create a very direct path west over to the Opus Light Rail Station connection on the trail for those that might want to bike to rail for the commute. It's about a mile away as the crow flies from the existing trail to the new station. We did have a conversation with City of Minnetonka about this. They thought that sounded like a great idea, but you know, of course, they have their own funding things, so have to look at the ways to do that. They are also building a new large park directly adjacent to the rail station, and so that might be an opportunity for some of the trail connections as well through there. But then we would sign that and make sure that it's very clear, you know, like this is how you get over there and so on.
Is that a MnDOT bridge?
It is a MnDOT bridge, relatively recently reconstructed, and the sidewalks are wide enough to accommodate a shared use trail on it. So the recommendation from the perspective of the Edina side of the border, there's some potential for some slight, you know, kind of widening of some of the existing sidewalk down closer to the intersection. And then you probably would have some minor intersection improvements kind of leading over the highway in order to accommodate that type of trail crossing over.
I think, didn't United Healthcare help pay for that bridge, but it's controlled 100%.
It is MnDOT's bridge, yeah, yeah.
And that was the 9 Mile Creek Trail before they redid 169 and put the tunnel there.
Yeah.
So it's wide enough to be true.
Yeah. Yeah, and they've actually, when you go on the Minnetonka side, about 3/4 of the distance between Edina and the station, they've already got a new trail there. It's just how do you get it the last little bit. So you know, that one might be an opportunity for some sort of joint funding application or something like that as well. We also talk about creating some new boardwalk connections up on the north side. This is something that was also in your long-term bike plan, but adding to the boardwalk so that there's another connection up to the neighborhood there. And then there's also an opportunity you could extend the boardwalk and actually make it connect all the way up to the other portion of Lincoln Drive up by Van Valkenburg Park as well. So there's some opportunity there. And that is in some of your long-term plans already. We've kind of changed the location slightly for it, but is kind of a neat opportunity to extend that boardwalk and that connection. We talked about these cow trails. We had already mentioned those, so making some little adjustments, some of the things that we kind of talk about. One is we see a lot of people going up this hill to get to to get their coffee. So, creating an ADA accessible way for people to do that. And then another one is sort of behind Children's. This is right down over, yep, right there. A lot of people are cutting kind of back that direction. I think probably to get over to the Loden from the trail. And so just making some small improvements there to create a little bit more accessibility in those spaces. We talk about the potential to redesign Lincoln Drive. So right now, and again, this goes into the longer term ideas, this is probably the most expensive thing that's on the table, real frankly. The way that it's designed right now, it's a fairly wide road that carries a very little traffic. There are some trucks that need to get there, so we would need to make sure that the places where they need to turn in, there's still turning radiuses and so on. But there is enough public right-of-way there to add a sidewalk on both sides of the streets, to have a boulevard of trees on both sides of the streets, and be able to really make that feel more neighborhood rather than industrial. So larger investment, but I think actually helps set up some of the longer-term redevelopment opportunities and the character that you want to have, I think, in some important ways. Bus service improvements, as you, I'm sure know, the Metro Transit is going through this Network Now thing. They had some really kind of cool improvements that they were planning for the Minnetonka side of the highway around Opus, so we worked to help make sure that in Edina's letter to them, we suggested those should be on this side a little bit as well. One of the specific kind of cool things is that it's going to be one of their pilot zones for their flex zone service, which is a door-to-door service where you kind of call it like an Uber and it takes you to and from the light rail station or shopping within a zone. So they have a zone of about, 1.5 mile radius around the station. We're like, okay, can we just pull that another half mile so that we can get our space into that as well? And then, this has been something that's kind of come up, the idea of working to establish community branding. Right now, there's a variety of different types of signage in the area. The small area plan being called Lincoln Londonderry, I think there's been a little bit of, where are we talking about again when you say that? So whether or not that's actually establishing some sort of new naming here or taking the Lincoln Londonderry brand and building that out. But working to refine that and working to refine some of the wayfinding and other things where there's a variety of different types of signs in the area as well. So that gets me to the end of the short term. So maybe I'll pause there. I want to make sure that we do have time to get through the long term, but just if there's any kind of key comments for maybe, let's say 2 to 5 minutes, and then I'll jump into the long term.
I think you better go right to the long term.
Should I go? Okay, and then we can circle back. So the long term, and I'm going to just switch these maps here, and I know you guys have this in front of you as well. Again, everything that we are trying to reflect here reflects the implementation of the things in the short term. So in terms of the setting design guidelines, the design of the buildings that we've put in place here reflect those guidelines that we've been working to develop within them. So the first kind of key element is, what does it look like if the children's campus, which is already entitled as mixed use, does a full redevelopment? So we've looked at how you might arrange some of those buildings. I already talked about that kind of hopefully clever use of the parking garage and trying to kind of wrap around that. Working to establish a lot larger use of the site as green space. Still getting a pretty good unit count on the number of units you could fit in there. Because of the relationship to, for example, the community space that we've talked about on this corner, this could be an opportunity for some retail on that corner, as could some retail along some of these sides, but really working to look at that. And you will notice that these have similar counts to what's in the Loden, but they are a little less bulky buildings. The actual buildings have been broken up a little bit more within that space. So I think one of the main points here is that if and when that does redevelop, really trying to work to master plan it, make sure that the green space opportunities and public access are really working through that as you see that type of redevelopment. In the northern part of the area, what we've tried to do was really try to think through a strategy that brought more intense uses a little bit closer to the highway and a little bit less intense uses closer to the existing neighborhood. So you can see that the back kind of half of these parcels is largely been redeveloped as some sort of combination of retail, commercial, or you could also do additional housing back in some of those areas. In fact, looking at actually the parcel lines, there's a parcel line right here. So this building, for example, could be actually a good candidate for doing additional housing back there as well. And then a little bit closer to the street, what we've done is more of a townhouse. And this could also, you know, it could be sort of townhouse shaped buildings, but they could be 3 flats. They could be, there's a few different ways that you could do that. One of the things, obviously this, again, a developer has to come in and you gotta work with them and see what's in the market right then. But we did hear from folks too that they wanted to think about ownership opportunities. And so townhouses more typically, you know, we can't say for sure in a plan, this is gonna be ownership and this is not unless we're actually investing some money in it. But we can say that townhouses are more likely to be ownership and that they are also probably an opportunity for affordable ownership. And that could be something that could move forward as well. So you actually get a mix of unit types between the kind of different areas as well as continuing to establish some additional retail and commercial.
So Zach,
Yeah.
go back if you would. I'm very concerned about that, I don't know, the bracket with the parking lot in the middle being retail. Yeah.
These ones?
I think that needs to be guided, not retail. So whether it's light industrial or office or housing, nobody's gonna find those shops.
Yeah.
So I think to set up for success, we need to not talk about retail in that space. You know, if they had like a gift shop or, you know, something within an office building, that would work. But there's not gonna be any street traffic other than the neighborhood going in that. So, so I would strongly discourage that from being retail space.
We can definitely take that under advisement as we talk through that. And I think those are also housing opportunities there
And,
too.
I mean, I think Steve will back me up on this, but we interviewed a woman who actually owns a nail salon right there.
Yeah.
And she loves the spot. She loves the space. Her customers love it. They know how to get there. Everyone has Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever now. So she's very happy with retail in that tiny corner way up there. So.
Well, and I will say that one thing, and this we're kind of jumping to the end here, but one of the things that we did try to do as a part of this redevelopment is kind of reestablish the road network so that rather than kind of your main road that people are thinking about being Lincoln all the way through, there's a little bit more of a moving into the area. So my thought had been, if you do have retail established in kind of these areas, and then you're doing some of this path turn, especially with the visibility to the highway, it might be possible to establish it back in there. But I do think, I think residential is a possibility as well. And ultimately, if what we're doing is steering land use, what we could just talk about is, you know, this could be a mixed use 4 back here, and then we could kind of let the market and the developers decide, hey, is that really gonna work for me or not for that type of development?
Yeah, I think it's just expectation setting, so.
Sure.
The broader you could make it then is good,
I think
but.
that makes a lot of sense.
We had also at one time talked about maker spaces back in some of those.
That could be possible.
It'd be interesting to find out just roughly what kind of jobs exist in the area today and how much people are getting paid.
Yeah.
And because, you know, I hear the goal for it to be live, work, and play. But as I listen to this and I see the way things are being broken down, and I know it's going to be office, residential, and it's not going to be industrial, it's not going to be dedicated commercial, and it is going to be guided by what the market wants. And we know the easiest thing to build is rental market rate. I think there's a pretty good chance that this is going to be mostly live, play with retail that may not provide much wage. So if that's, and it does really seem like there's a lot of places in Edina where we are really moving toward mostly residential and, you know, kind of moving away from being that city that has more, you know, like, I don't know if you could say light industrial, higher paying jobs. That's not what we're aiming for. It seems like we're aiming more toward becoming primarily a bedroom community. And I think this has the potential to follow along that movement that's already established. So I just want to say that because I think that's where we could be heading, because it will be guided by
And I
the
think
marketplace.
ultimately that is an important point of decision making. I think in the interviews with the building owners and business owners that are in those areas, I think a lot of the sentiment that I heard, and please correct me if you feel I'm misstating this, was that the buildings that they have there primarily work for them because they built them and they are very inexpensive for them. They own them outright. You know, there's not a mortgage. However, there's also not a lot of market for that type of light industrial that doesn't have better highway access than this area currently does.
Yeah, the business owners love the location because of the access to the highway.
Yeah.
No, and some of them are paying incredibly good wages for
Yeah.
people who have just a high school diploma. And so I think we need to ask ourselves what, you know, it's complicated. Do we want to keep that? I think it's of value.
And the other thing that I would say is I think there are some areas within it that are providing some affordable commercial spaces for uses that are absolutely necessary, that the market would not support them in a more expensive building. And so what types of investments the city's willing to make in order to try and kind of keep some of that commercial affordability in the long term, I think is also an important question. The specific one that it always stands out for me is there's a like Russian speaking adult daycare back in there that I can't imagine has very good margins on anything they're doing, but they're providing an incredibly important service. And so that's definitely, as with any redevelopment, it needs to be something that's thought about and centered.
Can I ask one quick question? And maybe you guys, I'm assuming you guys have there's a lot of road here for something that's so eco-focused. Is there a reason for as many roads from a circulation perspective?
Really just to shorten block lengths and try and make it a little more community feeling. It's the existing, like some of those buildings that are out there right now are like 600 feet long. They're very, very large spaces. And so when you start looking at redevelopment, it's bigger parcels as well. We actually, this is something that we can actually provide as well. We've started to do calculations of the before and after in terms of, we are adding more roads, but we're also removing a lot of parking lot. So the impermeable total is decreasing throughout, and that's something that we could probably continue to push further.
And that's actually not a lot of roads. You can actually have another road, if you're looking at, you know, Morningside, for example, you could have another road in here, and those would be blocks.
Yeah.
Besides Morningside.
A lot of them are existing, like, drive lanes of parking lots as well, so it's kind of trying to take those and turn those into something that's a more usable form.
Yeah, you can actually get a rough sense of internal roadways by just walking around it there.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way the system is set up now.
Well, and we wanted to think about, like, with the redevelopment opportunities, that kind of had to make sense with the existing parcels as well. So if we have, you know, we wanted to think through, let's say this guy wants to move faster than the guy who owns, you know, these two parcels. How can that still work in terms of the road connections and some of those things for us to do just that one first, or other ideas like that as well? The other thing I did just want to highlight, and then we can just kind of move on to discussion, is really looking at, you know, with any new redevelopment, working to try and create some of these buffer green spaces. And so, you know, whether that's between these buildings that, as we said, currently we're drawing as kind of retail and the neighborhood, but could also be higher density housing or mixed use and the neighborhood, so creating a larger kind of this, I think, would have a very nice boulevard feel with some, you know, nice green space that serves the community there. And then also on that one side of Children's, closer to closer to the wetland, really trying to emphasize that there as well. And I think that more or less pulls through all of the recommendations, so excited to kind of chat with you. The other thing, though, that I do want to put on your calendar is we are having a public open house. It's going to be December 2nd, and I'm forgetting the name of the church. Chapel Hills Church on Wooddale.
What time?
6? Yes, thank you.
Well, it starts at 5:30.
5:30. Presentation will be at 6, yeah.
Okay.
So we're gonna be taking feedback that we've gotten from you. The working group is gonna be working through what we wanna show on the kind of final draft that then goes to the community at that point.
Yeah. Steve?
I want to go back to your question. You were curious whether we felt that we're being pushed or pulled in a certain direction by the community. I think we asked the community 2 questions. One was, what would you like to see? And the other one was, what would you not like to see? And I have to say, in all fairness, I think the energy now is all on what we'd like to see.
That's good.
We asked people what you would not like to see. We didn't get very strong responses. Obviously, the earlier proposal of 5780 drew a very strong response, which we're all aware of. But other than that, we really haven't had a lot from the community where they said, we don't want this. And we're much more interested in, we want a restaurant, we want a grocery store.
Is that a shift? Because I remember when we were over at Public Works, there was a group of people there that were firm on what they did not want.
Yes.
There's definitely been a smaller local group that really would like to not just see any change at all in the area.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah.
So, and again, we have been trying to find a good balance between all of the different interests we've heard, between comments that we've heard that are contradictory in some cases, what we think is likely to actually be able to get built, and, you know, celebrates again the specific nature of this place next to this creek with this incredible trail, and really trying to think about how we honor that within all of those constraints.
Jim, you remember when 169 was closed between, you heard, what did people, they don't want traffic through the neighborhood.
Yeah, well, they had it.
We had it. And that, right, so anything that interrupts the basic, the general lifestyle is a negative.
Bumper to bumper, they did, yeah, I get that. We didn't like that either. Well, unfortunately, we don't have much time to talk here now because we gotta go down and get ready for the council meeting, but I would suggest that when you get the feedback off of your next public open house, I think the council would be willing to meet with you again and hear what folks had to say and how it refined your thinking on what is the thinking at the next stage is the same as it is now, short term and long term, and then.
Yeah, well, and I think I think our next, the way that it's scheduled right now is after this meeting, we will be working on completing a final draft, which would then, you know, be published publicly as well, and then moving through the process of both planning commission and council approval on it. I think if it's desirable to have us come back and do another kind of update on, you know, here's what changed and introduce the full document to you as well, though that's something we could definitely work with.
Let me ask my colleagues that, because I think if they believe that there's opportunity here for one more chance at council input, and that input would be important before you write your recommendations, then we should do that. Otherwise.
I don't know what else we have on the docket for the work sessions.
What's your, there's a lot of stuff on the docket for
Yeah.
next year, so that's my concern too. But maybe once you have some time, me and Addison can touch base and see if there's time to either put in a work session or if maybe it'll be a council meeting check-in.
We would almost certainly want to try and do it in December or early January if possible, which I know is, I can see on your faces, the answer you were looking for here.
Not gonna happen.
Yeah, I know how tight your schedules are and how difficult that is. We absolutely can also, though, send a memo to you along with the draft plan of this is the feedback that we got, both from you, this is what we've adjusted, from you and the public, and make sure that you, at the very least, we could get you those materials too, if the scheduling doesn't work out.
Okay, yeah, we'll work on scheduling first, and we'll see, we'll go from there. If it would work out, we'd like to have one more chance at input, I think.
Yeah, and I guarantee you, I mean, with how smart Edina residents are, if they see the plan, they will show up. And they will give you feedback, and right, and I.
Yeah.
And I think that's good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much, we appreciate it.